Hey! Oh crap! Could you be any louder? Ho ho ho! I'm sorry to wake you, Marcus. I'm Santa! And I'm going back to bed. Wait! Santa, please. I have to get up really early tomorrow, okay? So if you don't mind. I got something cool to show you though. Santa, I'm sure it's really cool, but the thing is I have to get up in like 4 hours. So. I promise, it's really cool. Santa, please. What could be so important that you have to show me now, huh? I mean, what is your deal? The deal, my friend, is this computer for $1,000. You want it? Actually, yeah, sure. Just here, take it. Okay, so we're doing this. Easy! Hello everyone and Merry Christmas! The holiday season is finally upon us, which gives us a great opportunity to spend some quality time with our families and friends. But why would you want to do that if you could game all day every day? Which is why I've made this computer build guide to keep all you guys occupied so you never have to go outside and socialize ever again. Blech. I'm kidding, of course, but seriously, building a computer is a great way to spend some time with your loved ones. Plus, it is sure to provide you hours and hours of entertainment to come. And today, have I got a heck of a build for you guys. For $1,000 US, you get an 8-core 16-thread CPU, a GTX 1070 Ti, 16 gigs of RAM, and a 500 gig SATA SSD. So the format of this video is going to be a little different from my previous videos, which were all comparisons and reviews. In these PC build guides, I'll be going over each part in detail and discussing why I chose each of them, as well as some alternatives you could consider. All the prices I show here are the lowest prices taken from either Amazon or Newegg. Be sure to check either website because one may have a larger discount than the other. Now, prices change all the time, and by the time you watch this, the deals might have sold out already. So here's a summary of the parts list if you want to buy them right away. Links to all the products shown in the video are also available in the video description below. Now with that out of the way, let's first talk about the CPU. The Ryzen 7 1700 is an 8-core 16-thread chip that has a base clock of 3 GHz and a max boost of 3.7. On Amazon and Newegg, this will run you about $200. Yes, you heard me, for an 8-core 16-thread chip. And it includes a pretty good air cooler. Yes, I know, the 1700 is from the previous generation, but at this price, who cares? The Ryzen 7 2700 is almost $70 more expensive for just a slight bump in clock speeds. From a price to performance standpoint, there's no conversation to be had. This is the deal. This thing will get around i7 8700K level multi-core performance while having decent, if unexceptional, single-core speed. What this means is that it will get up to 100 FPS in AAA titles at any resolution and detail level, assuming your GPU can handle it, and will comfortably hit 144 FPS in esports titles at any resolution and detail level, again, assuming your GPU can handle it. And 16 threads will provide plenty of future-proofing because games are only starting to use 12 threads. You may then ask me, if I don't need 8 cores and 16 threads for gaming right now, why not just get a 6-core 12-thread Ryzen 5 1600 and save my money? Yeah, don't do that. At $160, it's just $40 less. It's not worth the money at this point. Also, rumor has it that AMD is preparing their 7nm Ryzen 3000 CPUs, with the Ryzen 3s now having 6 cores and 12 threads, and the Ryzen 7s having 12 cores and 24 threads. Ho ho! Man, these days it seems like CPUs just keep getting more and more cores. So yeah, don't get the Ryzen 5. Get the Ryzen 7 1700 at least. The cooler included with the Ryzen 7 1700 is the Wraith Spire RGB, which is good enough for an all-core overclock of 3.7 GHz on the Ryzen 7 1700. You may remember on my last video, if you watched that, I recommended you to leave Ryzen's at stock speeds and let XFR take over and adjust clock speeds automatically. But that was for Ryzen 2000, which have much higher multi-core speeds at full load. For the 1700, the all-core speed reaches only about 3.2 GHz. The max boost clock is 3.7, which is low enough such that an all-core speed of 3.7 GHz is possible, while still being relatively cool on the Wraith Spire. So do yourself a favor and manually set all the cores to 3.7 GHz in the BIOS. Now what about if you want to reach 144 FPS in AAA titles, assuming your GPU can handle it, or if you play simulation games like FSX or OMSI? Then get the i7-8700K. It has similar multi-core performance while having a 1 GHz higher max boost clock. And at $370, it will cost you double the price of the Ryzen 7 1700 once you buy a cooler and a $200 Z370 motherboard with good enough power delivery, making the total build $1,300. But I really wouldn't recommend getting any other Intel K chip at this point. The overclockable i5s and i3s have too few threads for AAA games. Battlefield 1, for example, uses nearly 100% of the i5-8600K's 6 threads, which means it's pretty much maxed out. So the i5s and i3s really aren't going to cut it for future AAA gaming. The 9900K, on the other hand, is way too expensive for a sub-$2,000 machine, so if you need to go the Intel route, the i7-8700K is the best Intel CPU for this kind of build. Now we move on to motherboards. Here we've got the ASUS B350 Prime Plus ATX motherboard. And at $85, this board is a great value for the money. It has 4 memory slots, Realtek 7.1 HD audio, NVMe M.2 support, USB 3.1 Gen 2 support. Oh, and in case you're confused with all this Gen 1 or Gen 2 crap, USB 3.1 Gen 1 is a renaming of USB 3.0 and has a data transfer speed of 5 gigabits per second. USB 3.1 Gen 2 has a data transfer speed of 10 gigabits per second, which is double that of USB 3.1 Gen 1. At the $90 price point, there are tons of motherboards to choose from, and generally you can expect to see mostly identical features from different B350 boards of the same price and the same form factor. And it's important to compare boards of the same form factor because smaller boards like Micro ATX or Mini ITX give up a couple of expansion slots in order to become smaller. The only major differences between boards of the same form factor and price point are the color schemes and the lighting implementation. So choose whatever $80 to $100 board you prefer the looks of, or whatever's cheaper. But I don't recommend you go over the $100 price point. I think $80 to $100 really is the sweet spot for a value B350 board for a $1,000 build. As you spend more, you don't get a lot more usable features that will actually make a difference to your PC experience because you already have all that you need on this board. You can spend more for a motherboard like this one, the ASUS ROG Strix B350-F, which I believe is around $115 right now on Amazon Newegg. You do get better power delivery and a few more ports or slots here and there, and RGB lighting, which I do like. If you want a nicer looking board, sure, spend a bit more for the B350-F. But in terms of usable features that will actually affect your PC experience, a B350 Prime Plus or similar is all that you really need. Now what about the chipset? You might ask, a B350 board for Ryzen 7? Doesn't it deserve an X370 board? Yes and no, really. It depends on what Ryzen 7 you get. A Ryzen 7 1800X with a 240mm liquid cooler overclocked to 4 GHz on all 8 cores? Sure, get a $200 X370 board for the better power delivery, so you can overclock that thing as much as possible. But a 1700 using the stock cooler at 3.7 GHz on all the cores? Nah, B350 will be perfectly adequate for that purpose. Now for the graphics card. For $400 we have the GTX 1070 Ti. And this is the Gigabyte version, which is the cheapest at the time of filming, but 1070 Ti's from any other board partner like MSI, EVGA, ASUS, and Zotac are pretty much identical in performance, so get whatever is the cheapest one or whichever you like the look of the most. The GTX 1070 Ti is approximately 5% slower than the GTX 1080. Having slightly fewer CUDA cores and slower GDDR5 memory instead of GDDR5X on the GTX 1080. This is good for playing AAA games at 60 frames per second or better at high detail or better at 3440 by 1440 or ultra-wide 1440p. The card isn't quite good enough for playing all AAA titles at 60 FPS high detail at 4K. You really need a GTX 1080 Ti or RTX 2080, which is 30 to 40% faster. Right now, for a mid to high-end card, this is the deal. Because the GTX 1080 and VEGA 56, which both perform pretty similarly to this card, are priced too high to be any good value. The RTX 2070 right now, though, is $500, which is around 15 to 20% faster than the 1070 Ti, which isn't bad value actually. It might even get better over time because RTX technologies could increase performance in the future, not with ray tracing, but with the AI from the tensor cores. We're already kind of seeing that today with NVIDIA's DLSS, which offloads the anti-aliasing work from the CUDA cores to the tensor cores, which lets the CUDA cores work on rendering the textures faster since they don't have to do any calculations for AA, while the AI works on all the super sampling and anti-aliasing witchcraft behind the scenes. For less than $100 more than a 1070 Ti, RTX might be a worthy future investment. If you want to save a little money though, you could turn to the second-hand market. You may be able to find a 1070 Ti or a GTX 1080 for around $300 if you're lucky. Moving on to RAM now. Here we've got a 2x8GB kit of Corsair Vengeance RGB DDR4 3000. This is one of the cheapest 16GB DDR4 3000 kits on Amazon at $130. Of course, you don't have to go with this specific kit. Just like motherboards and graphics cards, you've got tons of brands and styles to choose from. Don't go any higher than DDR4 3000 though, because RAM support for 1st gen Ryzen was pretty iffy above 3000 MHz. Because with DDR4 3200, it can only run at 3200 MHz with specific RAM kits in specific boards, so it's kind of a hit or miss there. With DDR4 3000, they won't run quite at 3000, but most RAMs should run at 2933 MHz in almost any board as long as it has the latest BIOS. But be sure to check the motherboard's QBL or qualified vendor list, which is a list of all the RAM kits that are tested to work at different speeds on that motherboard. 16 gigs of RAM is a good amount right now for playing games and multitasking. 8 gigs is too little for this level of machine really. It's usually alright for esports games, but even that's pushing it. The minimum I'd put in this level of computer is 16. 32 gigs is not an unreasonable amount if you do extra work on the side like video editing. So if you wanted to, you could get a 2x8GB kit right now, or when or if you need it, you can get another 2x8GB kit to double your RAM capacity to 32 gigs. Now let's talk about secondary storage. Here we have a 500GB Crucial MX500. Now this is a SATA SSD, meaning its sequential read and write speeds are around 500 megabytes per second, which are much faster than any hard drives, which only have read and write speeds of around 100 megabytes per second. But they're still slower than NVMe SSDs, which have sequential read and write speeds exceeding 2 gigabytes per second. Guys, it's almost 2019. Any computer built this year onward, no matter how basic, needs to have an SSD as a boot drive at least. A hard drive takes a minute or two to fully boot into Windows, while an SSD only takes a few seconds. This 500GB MX500, for example, is a good value for $73. I've used this drive before on another machine. It's fast and responsive. It's a pretty good drive. My computer has a 1TB Samsung 850 EVO, which is also a good drive, and it comes with a drive cloning software, which could be helpful if you've got some files on an older drive that you want to migrate. There are lots of good 500GB SATA SSDs to choose from, and you generally can't go wrong with either one of them, as long as you stick with reputable brands like Samsung, Crucial, ADATA, or Western Digital, for example. I wouldn't go below 500 gigs though. The 250 gig drives are just not cheap enough to justify buying one. The 250 gig Crucial MX500, for example, is $53, 70% of the money for half the capacity. That's just not a good value. Furthermore, 250 gigs is a little small to store a lot of programs and games. Remember, this will be a boot drive, so you also have to consider the storage space that Windows itself will take. If you think that a 500 gig SATA SSD isn't enough to store all your programs, I'd recommend getting a larger 1TB SSD, which is what this is, over an additional hard drive. The 1TB Crucial MX500 is $135, which is less than double the money over the 500 gig MX500 for double the capacity, which is a pretty good deal in my book. Yes, it is more expensive than a 1TB hard drive, but it's so worth it in my opinion. Once you get used to an SSD speed, it feels like a huge step back whenever you need to use your hard drive, and your high-end gaming computer all of a sudden feels like an office machine from 10 years ago. I guess that's why they call them hard drives, because they're too hard to live with. Hey! Okay, NVMe SSDs on the other hand are really fast, but they are more expensive than their SATA equivalents. The Samsung 860 EVO 500 gig is a SATA SSD, which is $73 on Amazon right now. The Samsung 970 EVO, the successor to this thing, the 500 gig version at least, is $145 on Amazon. While the 970 EVO is more than twice as fast as the 860 EVO, it isn't too noticeable in normal day-to-day use. Loading programs and copying files on NVMe will save you a couple of seconds, but it really isn't worth it for this level of build. If it's a $1,500 build with an 8700K or 2700X, yes, absolutely, that deserves NVMe. But for a $1,000 build, save your money and get a SATA SSD instead. One use case I would consider NVMe for is 4K video editing. 4K videos have much higher bit rates than 1080p video, so you'll need a faster drive to prevent any lag while scrubbing through footage, especially if you pile them up and have multiple tracks of 4K video. The higher read speed of an NVMe drive here really does help. I used to edit 4K footage off of the 1TB A50 EVO SATA drive I mentioned earlier. While playing one clip was alright, as soon as I had multiple clips and tracks, Vegas Pro really started to lag. But once I relocated all the footage to the 500 gig 960 EVO NVMe drive, it was a much better experience. Now let's talk about power supplies. The power supply I picked up is an EVGA 500BQ. For $56, you get a 500 watt 80 plus bronze semi-modular power supply. 500 watts is really more than enough for this combination. The Ryzen 7 1700 only uses around 90 watts in full load, while the 1070 Ti uses less than 200 watts. The rest of the system components use so little power they're practically negligible compared to the CPU and the GPU, so the effective power usage you get while under full load is about 300 watts, so a 500 watt power supply is perfectly adequate. The 80 plus rating means that the power supply has more than 80% efficiency at 20%, 50%, and 100% load. There are several tiers of efficiency beyond the 80 plus rating. White, which is the least efficient, followed by bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and finally titanium, which is the most efficient. 80 plus bronze is a normal rating for this kind of price, but I think this power supply is a good deal because it's semi-modular, which means some of the cables are not attached to the power supply and can be attached if required, which keeps your build much tidier as you don't have to mess around with unnecessary cables. Last but not least, we have the case. This one is more of a personal preference because there are so many choices out there. There are full, mid, and mini tower cases, mini ITX cases, dual chamber cases, weird show cases, airflow cases with mesh fronts, cases with acrylic fronts, tempered glass side panels, cases with RGB, cases from Corsair, Cooler Master, NZXT, Fractal Design, and it doesn't stop there. Overwhelmed yet? Well, let me put you at ease, because once you know what you're looking for, we can narrow our search significantly. We have an ATX motherboard, so for this level of build I'd get a mid-tower case. We have an air-cooled Ryzen 7 1700 and an open air-cooled GTX 1070 Ti, which means we need a case with good airflow. Otherwise, all the heat from the CPU and GPU will be stuck inside the case. Heat transfer rate depends on the temperature difference between the two media. So if all that heat gets stuck inside the case, the CPU and GPU won't be able to dissipate their heat effectively, and will end up operating at higher temperatures than if they were in a case with good airflow, which may reduce the lifetime of those parts. With all that in mind, check out the Fractal design Meshify C. And as you can tell by the name, it's got an angular front mesh panel, which I personally think looks pretty good. It's got two USB 3.0 front ports, two pre-installed 120mm fans, one exhaust and one intake, options for a tempered glass, tinted tempered glass, or metal side panel, so you can decide how you want your hardware to be showcased. Support up to an ATX motherboard, two combo 3.5 and 2.5 inch drive bays, and three dedicated 2.5 inch drive bays. At $90, this has tons of features and looks for the money. However, if the word discreet isn't in your dictionary, check out the Cooler Master MasterCase H500 for $100. It's a little bit more money, but you do get more features. You get two USB 2.0 front ports and two USB 3.0 front ports, three pre-installed fans, one 120mm exhaust, and two 200mm RGB intake fans. It's got a carrying handle for transport and supports up to an ATX motherboard like the Fractal, but has one less 2.5 inch drive bay. It's got a tempered glass side panel, and it includes both a mesh and transparent acrylic front panel in case you want to swap them out midway, while you can only order the Meshify C with either one of the side panels. For this level of build, the price range of case I would buy would be between around $60 to $100. Below $60, you start to sacrifice too many features like build quality just to save a quick buck. On the other hand, generally if you spend more you do get more features, but above $100, the case starts to eat a little too much into the budget than I'd like. Then you'd have to start skimping on hardware itself to stay near that $1,000 system cost, which I don't recommend at all. Because the whole point of this system build is to get the best performance out of the least money. And for $1,000, this is seriously an amazing deal. If you guys are planning to build a gaming desktop this Christmas for yourself or your loved ones for a good budget, look no further. This is it. Ryzen 7 1700, GTX 1070 Ti, 16 gigs of DDR4 3000, and a 500 gig SATA SSD. Man, it's such a great time to be a PC gamer. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. Please hit that bell icon if you want to be notified whenever I upload a new video. Post your questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, or suggestions down in the comments below. And links to both Amazon and Newegg for all the products shown in the video, including the alternative parts, are available in the video description below for your convenience. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.